deficit spending is so high under the Liberal government that for the fiscal year of 2024-2025, Canadians are going to be expected to pay $92.5 billion in interest alone. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. You heard me correctly, $92.5 billion Canadians are on the hook for the year of 2024-2025, and it's only going to get much worse because the federal and the provincial governments are borrowing left, right, and center instead of figuring out a way that Canadians can be solving our debt crisis by removing the legislation, by removing the crippling taxes. They are simply printing money and throwing it at the tariff situation with the United States, throwing it at the auto industry, throwing it at the steel industry. That's, of course, not going to solve the problem, but it is going to add to our ever-crushing debt. Appreciate that if it's $92.5 billion for Canada for 1 year, that depending on where you live, is anywhere from $1,900 to $3,500 coming directly off of your pay, coming right out of your earnings, that goes right into the government that they then take and pay to other countries or in other places that have lent them money. So we have to take our different perspective towards this. We have to realize that when you hear Mark Carney talking about how he's funding a program or they're investing in this or he's going to give $2 billion to Ukraine because that's the most recent announcement. Every time you hear him say, I'm going to give $40 billion to the steel industry, or you hear Doug Ford say, I'm going to give $11 billion to the auto industry, what he's actually doing is taking a credit card that's got your name on it and charging that to you, not to him, to you. And then he runs around taking that right off of your paycheck. He takes from other programs, from schools, from daycare. He takes from hospitals. He takes from roadworks in an effort to cover that debt, because if he doesn't pay those interest payments, the interest rate can change. And when you're talking about this kind of money, even a 0.01% change in the interest rate can put billions of more dollars onto the debt. Understanding that he's running this up in your name, understanding that they are making this happen, all the while trying to convince you that the best thing for you is to leave all of our resources in the ground, is to make it impossible for investments of businesses, to make it impossible to own homes. This is the kind of future that they envision for you. Debt and no prosperity. One of Canada's think tanks, the Fraser Institute, released a report on the state of the debt that Canadians are going to be forced to pay because we have what's called deficit spending, indicating that the government is not only operating at a deficit, but they're increasing the amount of money that they're putting out. And to do that, they have to borrow money. That's the same thing as you would have to do with the house. If you want to make an investment and, you build an extension on your place, build a deck, any of that, you're borrowing money from somebody to make that happen, and then you're going to be paying that back. Well, Canadians have to pay back all of this money. Mark Carney could resign tomorrow, and any of the debts, any of the spending that he has made, he's no longer responsible for, because we know that he doesn't pay taxes in Canada. We know that he doesn't really live in Canada, so he'll just take right off and never have to worry about any of that debt ever again. And that's something we should consider when we're talking about our national leader, PS, off onto the side. Now, let's take a look at some of the findings in this report. Federal and provincial government debt interest payments will cost each Canadian between $1,937 and $3,432, depending on the province. In recent years, deficit spending and growing government debt have become a trend for many Canadian governments. Like households, governments are required to pay back interest on their debt. Obviously, people are not lending us this money because they are, feeling kind and warm and fuzzy. Their entire job is to make money off of other people's money. For all you know, that we're incurring debt with Brookfield. Imagine in your mind what that looks like as a conflict of interest. But what we have to see here as we break down these numbers, where I'm going with this, is there is a way out of this for us. We should not be in this situation, and there are two outcomes. There's the outcome where we snap out of it, we tell our governments to stop it, and we make the appropriate changes to put us into operating into profit. Or we become a failed state and our economy turns into that of, what you heard about on TV, like some sort of a third world country whose dollar is worth nothing. Hyperinflation is making bread go up by tens of thousands of dollars overnight. These are the two very real possibilities, and one of them is terrible thinking, and the other one, to make it happen, wouldn't be that difficult, but it would require a lot of changes, especially at the federal level. In aggregate, the provinces and federal government are expected to spend $92.5 billion on interest payments in 2024-2025. Residents in Newfoundland and Labrador face by far the highest combined federal provincial interest payments per person, which is $3,432. Manitoba is second with $2,868 per person. Understand that that's per person for 1 year and only interest. That's not paying down any of the debt. And Mark Carney and all of these, many of these premiers are borrowing money because they're using the tariff as an excuse with the United States. They're not doing what is required to increase the amount of money that Canada has coming in. They're simply turning to these lenders and borrowing against your and I future, our children's future, to be paying these debt to people who are now just going to essentially get wealthy and more powerful off of our hard work, because people like Mark Carney, who have no responsibility to pay back this debt, are running up this tab with willy-nilly, without any oversight, without a budget, throwing money around as he sees fit. Federal government will spend a projected $53.8 billion on debt servicing charges, which is exactly what we're called, debt servicing charges, the interest. Imagine in your mind, you open up your credit card bill and it says your bare minimum monthly payment. Well, the bare minimum payment for the federal government this year is $53.8 billion, which is more than what the government expects to spend on the Canadian health transfer at $52.1 billion. The Canadian health transfer is how much money the federal government takes and gives to each and every province to help pay for their hospitals and whatnot. And significantly more than it expects to spend on child care at $35.1 billion. Child care benefits. So that's, the people who have children, they get a check in the middle of the month, that kind of thing, that's all in there. So we're spending more on debt than we are on looking after our kids and our hospitals. I mean, not combined, but does it matter? I mean, is that something that is this a good expenditure of money, $53 billion in debt so we can give $2 more billion to Ukraine? Or so that we can bail out the steel industry? Moving on to a couple of other strong points that this report is making. Combined federal provincial interest costs in Ontario is $36.2 billion. In Quebec, it's $21.8 billion. In Alberta, it's $9.5 billion. Are nearly as much as or more than what these provinces expect to spend on K-12 education in 2024-2025. So that's more money than they're giving to all their schools. Well, their elementary and high schools, at least. Meanwhile, combined federal provincial interest costs for British Columbia at $11.8 billion are higher than what the province expects to spend on its social services in 2024-2025. And you can see the chart. What's really sort of shocking is how high the blue number is. And you'll note that the blue on this graph is the federal representation. So the federal number is the same for everybody in every province, if you take note, and it's nearly $1,500. So if we were to say, take the province of Alberta and remove what Mark Carney is adding on to every single solitary Canadian, all of a sudden to cover their debt, it's only $400. I mean, you can see that even in New Brunswick, it wouldn't be that high. It'd still be high, $400, but $1,500 coming toward the Mark Carney spending. $1,500 so that he can borrow money to give to the steel industry. He can borrow money to give to the auto industry. He can borrow money to give to dentures and give to child care. And, you've heard all of the programs that the Liberal governments try to run out in front of you and try to get their press to talk about every time they realize that they might get elected out of office. But people don't seem to understand is that it's you and I that's paying for that. So if you don't have any need for example, the free birth control that they call the free birth control, then why are you necessarily going to be on the hook for that birth control? If you have no investment in the war with Ukraine, how come it is that Mark Carney just went there a couple of days ago and promised $2 billion more, all the while he has to borrow that money? We're not operating in what they call in accounting terms in the black, which is in the profit. We're not operating in that. We're operating in what they call in the red. And you have to appreciate what the red ink, right? So when you're in the red, you're losing money. And when you're in the black, you're making money. And that's why it's called, Black Friday. So what I want you to hear is that this federal government debt amounts, except for in a couple of situations, well, except for in Newfoundland and maybe to some extent Manitoba, it essentially accounts for more than half of this interest payment that you and I are going to be making at the 2024-2025 fiscal season. That's without taking down the amount of money that they are talking about running up right now. Don't forget, many of the bills that Mark Carney's running haven't come due yet. So we won't really find out until the parliamentary budgetary officer lets us know how much money they've done, how much spending they've done. And last time the parliament sat, the Liberal Party literally tabled the amount of expenditure that they did the day that the Monday of the week that the House was going to be breaking for the Christmas break. So it's not like they have a lot of transparency in their spending. It's not like we can just simply dial it up and say, hey, how come you spent, $400 million on this or $300 million on that? Many of you might be saying to yourself, well, there's a lot of debt. That's how governments operate. But the reason governments are doing that is because they have no resources and they're hoping to stimulate their economy and they're hoping to cover their services, which is why countries that are really poor don't have that line of credit. We can look, since everybody's well-versed in Donald Trump, we can see that much of what he's doing with these tariffs is taking that money that is generated by those tariffs and paying down the United States debt. I mean, it's come down, I think, $1 trillion. I haven't looked closely at it in recent weeks, but when I first looked at it, it had come down to an enormous amount of money. The thing that Canadians need to appreciate is that with every passing day, our economic forecast becomes weaker and weaker. And as it becomes weaker and weaker, our dollar becomes weaker. It's a little understood fact that the strongest dollar on earth is the Bahraini dinar. Bahrain is a country in the Persian Gulf that essentially transports a lot of oil. I don't want to bore you with the ins and outs and the subtleties of it. I just want you to appreciate that they have so much oil that they have a lot of money. And as a result of having that amount of oil and that amount of money, they have the strongest currency on earth. And if you were to take one Bahraini dinar and take it into your bank today, they would give you nearly 4 Canadian dollars. If you were to take a euro and take that into the Canadian bank, they would give you about $1.40. So the Canadian dollar is not that strong against all kinds of currencies around the world. And you may be asking yourself, why? Well, the biggest reason, of course, is that we have no economic development. I mean, we can sit around and talk about all of the foolishness that you hear coming out of the far left and the Liberal government, which is all chalked up to a very profound lack of comprehension and a lack of grasp of how the world really works. So when we see the strength of the dollar of this tiny little desert nation in the middle of the Persian Gulf, it's attributed completely and solely to its economic development of its natural resources. And then you look at other countries who have these kinds of economic development of their natural resources, and you say to yourself, well, Canada has a lot of natural resources. However, we have a government that has decided that we shouldn't be touching those natural resources, that somehow by having the prosperity that would come from the development of those natural resources, we're doing something wrong. Now, I don't agree with them, not even a little bit, because I understand how the world works. I understand the economy. You would think that Mark Carney would also grasp that, but it seems that even if he does grasp that, he's not telling anybody that's in Canada. He seems to believe that only people at the top should be making the money, and the rest of us should just be scraping around in the woods for bugs and twigs and whatnot. Canadian dollar getting weaker with every passing minute means that our debt increases with every passing minute, because it only takes, look, if you owe $10 and I tell you that what you have in your hand is worth $10, then we break even, right? We're good to go. But if I tell you what you have in your hand is only worth 8, then all of a sudden you still owe me 2. If I tell you what you have in your hand is worth 20, then I owe you half of it. You get it. It's not that complicated. I get that it can be very overwhelming, but the math is fairly straightforward. The stronger the dollar, the less we actually owe, because our purchase power, our spending power increases with the amount of the strength of our dollar, which is essentially based on the strength of our economy. Right now, we are slipping into 10th place, probably even getting closer to 11th place. Mexico is breathing down our neck when it comes to the amount of money that our GDP. All the while, our federal government is borrowing money, not against their own lines of credit, but against your and I, against our natural resources. So why are we not developing those natural resources inside of Canada? All the while, our federal government is borrowing money against it. That looks very suspicious in my mind. And if we want to solve these problems, if we want to say to ourselves that not only do we not have $3,000 a month, in the case of Newfoundland, $3,000 a year for paying down this, only the interest, but Canada has generated so much money that instead of giving equalization payments to the province of Newfoundland, they're actually giving, a $1,000 check to every person who lives in Newfoundland, who was born there, all of that kind of stuff, much like they do in places like Bahrain, where certain aspects of their culture get a piece of the revenue, every person. So there's a lot of money to be made, and there's a lot of benefits that can be coming toward the Canadian population. We're on the other side of it, though. We're over here telling ourselves that we shouldn't touch it. Not only should we not touch it, we want to have this standard of living. We want to run around the world acting like we're big shots, or at least the Liberals do. So they're writing checks in our name. They're spending money that they don't have because they don't have to worry about it. They're trying to pretend to you that it's an investment, but really it seems to be more of an investment for the money lenders than it does for the Canadian population. And the money that we could be using, the revenue that we could be generating to pay down these debts, to not have to borrow money at all. We would have our own money. Like in the case of Norway, they don't borrow money because they have like a $700 billion account somewhere. It's all pure profit. They make that off their oil. Norway generates a lot of oil in the North Sea. And so they have a lot of money that they spend on their population, that then don't have to pay up taxes because the government earned money through the oil. Now not only do we have oil, we got steel, aluminum, nickel, copper. I mean, nickel is a very rare substance on the face of the earth. There's not a lot of it found everywhere, but it's used in almost everything, especially like munitions, especially in the military industrial complex. We have other ones that I don't want to bore you with. The fact of the matter is that if it exists, we probably have it. What we don't have is the federal government getting out of the way and allowing us to get it out of the ground. Look, everybody can establish that we don't want the ground to get dirty. We don't want the water to get dirty. After that, let's get out of the way, move. Because we got to get to work. We have things we need to do. Unless you're comfortable with forever being in debt, unless you're comfortable giving $2,000 of your hard-earned money to Mark Carney so that he can pay that to one of his friends that lent him money. If you think to your mind, well, I would much rather have people be generating and paying me, or you know what, even if I could get that bill down to $100, that's great because that's $1,100 more a year in my pocket. And I got my eye on, a fancy dress or a new widescreen TV or whatever it is people like to buy. What I understand for sure is that even if you're not spending it, you like having it. You don't like giving it away. And of course, with the part that really I need to bring home to you is that if for whatever reason our dollar slips just a little bit, this number changes a lot. This debt changes considerably. And I don't feel comfortable paying $53.8 billion in interest payments, knowing that we're paying less to our hospitals. How many doctors could we hire with $53 billion? But it's going to service our debt. It's going on interest payments. It's not even bringing the debt down. It's just the bare minimum. All the while we sit on top of trillions of dollars. Stephen Guilbeault, Julie DeBruzen, Mark Garney, they all think that we shouldn't touch that money. They all think that you and I should be living in tiny little cubicles, paying millions of dollars for these little boxes in the sky, while they fly around on our private jet, spending our money, taking our hard-earned money and paying for their meals, their clothes, their shoes, all of that stuff. Now, I understand that certain amount of their cost of living that has to be accrued from the job that they're doing. But I don't understand them telling me that I should do without while they live like rock stars. That I can't grasp. And I would think that you couldn't agree with that either. Not knowing full well that all we have to do is repeal a couple of very short-sighted, very ideologically driven pieces of legislation And all of a sudden, everybody is floating in cash, like the Americans, like the Bahrainians, like the people in the UAE and other rich countries around the world that have tapped into their natural resources and have decided that it's good to share the wealth with their population. And I don't see why Canadians shouldn't be looking at it in the same light. I don't see why Canadians shouldn't be telling ourselves we're not selling our products to anybody. We're not letting any other country come in and take control of our natural resources. It's all going to stay in Canada. We will sell it to you, no problem at all. You're going to buy it from us, not the other way around. We're not going to be sitting here, going hungry, living in tiny little cubicles while you and your countrymen get fat off our resources. And I don't see how, if I was walking into Mark Carney's backyard and pulling stuff out of his ground, he wouldn't tell himself that he deserves a piece. So, I mean, this is nothing. My point there is that this is nothing that everybody on the world shouldn't agree with. Like, everybody gets it. What we have to understand is that it's time to push back and tell the government that it's enough. If you're going to be running up this bill, then let's start to pay for this bill, not me. Let's get it paid for. Let's get it paid for the way that you're running it up, with the same sort of concept, so that I can rest easy knowing that I'm going to have a house should I desire to, that my children are not going to be straddled with enormous amounts of debt, and that foreign nationals like countries are going to be coming here and taking out all of the wealth from this land because Mark Carney or someone like him ran up our debt. Then our dollar fell because they didn't allow for industrial development. They didn't allow for economic development. And as a result, we are all gone dirt poor, but they're still coming knocking for the money that we owe them. I'm going to wrap here. You can let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time.